The morning at Kensington Palace Gardens began like a sheet of fine silk stretched lightly across the sky, where the first tender rays of sunlight slipped through dew-soaked leaves and spilled onto the gravel paths in warm, golden patches, glimmering like crumbs of honey scattered in the air. The air was so crisp that each breath seemed to carry the scent of roses still holding the night's dew, mingled with a faint trace of lavender from the hedgerows, accompanied by the distant, unhurried chorus of birdsong and the soft, rhythmic murmur of the fountain at the garden's heart, steady, patient, like the slow heartbeat of the place itself. Overhead, pale clouds drifted lazily across a washed sky. Unhurried, as though the entire world had agreed to keep the peace of this morning intact, Catherine walked slowly beside her daughter, the soles of her low shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. A light beige coat fit snugly against her frame, a soft wool scarf loosely wrapped around her neck, the early breeze weaving through it, teasing loose strands of hair from the bun pinned low at the back of her head. Her hand enclosed Charlotte's small one warm, but with the faintest tremor of a child stepping into a space that feels both familiar and strangely set apart. Charlotte wore a powder blue sweater with a neat collar, the hem falling over cream cotton trousers. Her small flats brushed the gravel with a gentle shuffling sound. Every few steps, her free hand reached out to touch the blooms leaning toward the sunlight, as if to make sure they were truly there, and not just part of some half-remembered dream. They spoke about the simplest things, the kind of ordinary details that could belong to any family, the pages of a book. Charlotte was halfway through, and the character she liked best, a small project at school due by the end of the week, and the morning mischief of Louise sneaking an extra spoonful of jam when no one was looking. The words floated between them easily, threaded with light laughter. Yet beneath the warmth of their conversation, Catherine sensed a quiet undertone in her daughter's gaze, not sadness, but a deep stillness. The way someone might pause before a door they are not sure they're ready to open. She had seen that look before. On the days Charlotte asked about Granny Diana, the grandmother she had never met, yet whose name still echoed softly through their home in stories, in framed black and white photographs, and in memories, preserved like rare cloth passed down through generations. The air between them that morning was not only the tranquility of a leisurely walk, it carried something unspoken, something deeper, as though within each step and each shared sentence there was a slower, quieter current, guiding them toward a place neither had named yet. In that moment, Catherine could not have known that in only a few minutes, her daughter's footsteps would lead them both into a different kind of time where memory, love, and legacy would converge in the very garden that once served as a final refuge for a woman who loved it beyond all else. They followed the winding path toward the quieter edge of the gardens, where the hedges grew taller and the canopy of branches above sifted the morning light into shifting patterns across the gravel. Here, the sounds of the palace seemed further away, the murmur of distant voices fading, the faint hum of London beyond the walls dissolving into a green hush. The air felt denser, as though it carried the weight of memories that lingered here longer than anywhere else. Charlotte's steps began to slow. The swing in her arm grew still, and the soft rhythm of her shoes brushing over gravel became more deliberate. She gave her mother's hand a gentle squeeze, not urgent, not fearful, but purposeful, and then, without a word, she let go. Catherine felt the absence immediately, that slight gap where her daughter's warmth had been, and looked up to see where her gaze had gone. There it was, the statue, bronze and still, yet carrying a presence that made the space around it feel somehow alive. Diana stood at the center, arms extended, surrounded by sculpted children in frozen mid-step, their faces open with trust. It rose from a circle of carefully tended flowers, forget-me-nots in precise blue clusters. Framed by the low stone walls and the gentle embrace of trees overhead, the air here seemed to move differently. As if reluctant to disturb the silence, Charlotte took a step forward, and then another, her pace slow and steady, her eyes never leaving the figure ahead. She moved with the kind of focus Catherine had only ever seen in moments when her daughter was wholly absorbed in something beyond her age. Not the distracted curiosity of a child, but a kind of quiet reverence. Catherine remained where she was, a few paces behind, instinctively knowing not to intrude. The girl passed through the opening in the hedge and onto the central path. Her small frame seemed even smaller against the backdrop of the statue's weight and history. She walked past the stone-edged fountain, where water spilled in a steady whisper, the sound mingling with the distant rustle of leaves overhead. As she reached the base of the statue, she stopped. Her arms, which moments ago had hung loosely at her sides, now rested still, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. And then, without hesitation, she bent her knees and lowered herself to the ground. The gravel shifted softly beneath her as she knelt, her skirt folding neatly under her. She bowed her head, and her hands came together in the way Catherine had taught her to pray before bed. Her lips began to move in a faint, soundless rhythm. Catherine's breath caught. There was nothing staged about it. No audience. No photographer. No reason to perform. It was not an action born of instruction or expectation, but of something unseen that had drawn Charlotte forward. From where she stood, Catherine felt the moment as if it had a pulse, as though a thread had been pulled taut between the present and the past. And she was watching her daughter step across it, with the surety of someone who had walked that path before. Even the birds seemed to quiet. A breeze lifted the edges of the flowers around the statue, but did not break the stillness. Behind Catherine, a royal aide approached with a message. But upon seeing the scene, he stopped mid-step. His gaze lingered for a moment, before he silently retreated, sensing as Catherine did that something sacred was happening, something fragile that could dissolve if disturbed. Charlotte did not glance back. She did not shift her position. She simply remained there, a small figure before the bronze likeness of a grandmother she had never touched, speaking into the silence, as though she knew, with a child's certainty, that her words would be heard. From her place a few steps back, Catherine hesitated before moving forward, her boots pressing softly into the gravel, each crunch of stone beneath her feet sounding far too loud for the fragile quiet that had settled over the garden. She drew close enough to see her daughter's small shoulders, relaxed yet unwavering, and the curve of her clasped fingers, knotted in the familiar pattern she had taught her long ago at bedtime. There was no fidgeting, no restless shifting, only stillness. The kind that comes when a person's whole being is fixed on a presence they cannot see, but somehow know is there. It was then that Catherine's ears caught the faint thread of Charlotte's voice. So soft, it was almost lost in the breeze. "I know you're in heaven," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "But I hope you still come here sometimes. Mommy says you love this garden. I love it too." The words floated into the space between them like small feathers, impossibly light, yet weighted with something far beyond her years. She paused, her chin lowering slightly, before adding, "Daddy misses you. He never says it when he's sad. But I know. I see it in his eyes." The confession struck Catherine like a sudden gust, not for its sadness, but for the piercing truth of it. She pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking rapidly as her daughter went on, unaware of her mother's listening. "Thank you for watching us," Charlotte murmured, "for helping Mommy and Daddy be kind. I want to be brave like you. I want to make people feel safe like you did. Please help me do that." There was nothing rehearsed in her tone, no borrowed phrases. It was the raw sincerity of a child, speaking without fear of being misunderstood. Catherine felt a tightening in her chest, the kind that comes when love and grief meet in the same breath. She stepped forward and knelt beside her daughter, laying a gentle hand across her small back. Charlotte didn't flinch. She simply leaned into her mother's touch, as though she had been expecting it all along, and said softly, I wanted to say thank you to Granny Diana. Catherine could not answer right away. Her throat felt too tight for speech, and she could only look up at the statue towering above them, Diana's bronze arms open, her face captured in that poised, calm strength, and feel the enormity of time folding in around them. In that instant, the garden seemed to contract into a single moment in which two generations stood side by side, one flesh and blood, the other eternal in memory. Finally, her voice returned, quiet and trembling, as she told her daughter, "She heard you." "Darling, I know she did." Charlotte's eyes opened then, wide and clear, searching her mother's face for confirmation. "Really?" she asked. Catherine nodded, a faint smile breaking through the blur of tears. Grannies never stop loving. Even when we can't see them, they see us. The girl reached out, placing her hand gently on the base of the statue, a small hand against cold stone. A gesture that was both farewell and promise. A breeze passed lightly through the garden, bending the heads of the flowers in a silent bow, and for a moment it seemed as though the air itself was holding its breath. They remained at the statue's base for a long moment, the silence between them, not empty, but full of all the things that could not be rushed, of emotions that needed space to unfold. Catherine could feel Charlotte's small hand still resting against the cold bronze, and she sensed that her daughter wasn't quite finished, that she was waiting. Though not for permission, she was waiting for meaning, for the truth to come to her in her mother's voice. Catherine eased herself down so that she was kneeling beside her child. Their eyes level now. The stone figure of Diana rising above them like a sentinel in the soft light. All the years she had been taught to control her expression, to speak with composure, to let words fall neatly into the space between public image and private heart. None of that seemed to matter here. She was not the Princess of Wales in this moment. She was simply a mother, a daughter-in-law, a woman holding another woman's legacy in trust for a little girl who was asking for more than the polished fragments she had been given so far. "I haven't told you everything about her," Catherine began, her voice so low it was nearly carried off by the breeze. She searched her daughter's face, saw the steady openness there, and knew she was ready. "I wanted to wait until you could hear it the right way, and I think you're ready now." Charlotte's eyes didn't flicker away. She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was absorbing something she knew would stay with her. She was brave. Catherine continued, not only in the grand ways people write about, but in the small ones. She spoke up when others stayed silent. She reached out to help people no one else saw, and she loved your daddy more than anything in the world. She protected him with every part of her heart, even when it cost her more than anyone knew. Catherine paused then, her voice trembling with the weight of those words. Charlotte didn't speak, but her gaze didn't waver either. She was listening with that stillness that only belongs to children who have encountered sorrow early enough to understand its depth. She made mistakes. Catherine went on, the honesty in her voice, gentle but unflinching, but never out of hate, only out of hurt, and she turned that hurt into a way to fight for others. Charlotte reached out, her small fingers wrapping around her mother's hand. Catherine closed her own fingers over them, drawing strength from the simple connection. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the world didn't understand her, but that never stopped her from trying to make it better, and she would have loved you." Charlotte, fiercely, deeply. Her voice dropped even lower, and I think she still does. A faint wind moved through the garden then. Not sudden, not cold, just enough to lift the edge of Charlotte's skirt and stir the leaves above the statue's head. Both mother and daughter glanced upward at the same time. Catherine's lips curved in the smallest, knowing smile. "That was her," she whispered. Charlotte's mouth lifted at one corner, a smile that seemed to hold something older than her years. Catherine pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her close. feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the layers of fabric. They stayed that way, wrapped not only in each other, but in the presence of something greater than themselves. Catherine knew the moment was not just for Charlotte. It was for Diana too, for the story she never got to finish. For the love she left behind that still had somewhere to go. And it was for Catherine herself, who in this quiet, sheltered space had finally let her own voice rise above the silence, passing on the truth so the next generation would never forget the woman who came before, and the love that never left. By the time they returned to the palace, the sun had climbed higher, spilling a more insistent light over the gravel paths and the green lawns that now shimmered faintly with warmth. Behind them, the garden lay in a rare kind of stillness, the kind that lingers only after something sacred has unfolded there. As if the place itself was holding on to what it had witnessed, Charlotte walked a few steps ahead, her back straight, her step light yet deliberate, as though carrying something invisible but precious. Catherine followed a pace behind, her own heart still tangled in the quiet enormity of what had just happened. She knew they would both carry this morning for years. Though it would live in them differently, William had just returned from a morning briefing when the two of them entered. He was in the middle of shrugging off his jacket, his mind still half in the corridors of duty, when Charlotte's small form darted forward. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms tightly around his waist, pressing her face into the fabric of his shirt. It startled him for a moment, not because she wasn't affectionate, but because the embrace came without prelude, without any of the playful chatter that usually accompanied her. He looked down, his hand automatically ruffling her hair, a smile forming before he could speak. "What's this for, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Charlotte tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "I prayed with Granny Diana," she said. The words were simple, but they landed in him like a chord struck deep in an old résonant instrument. His smile faltered not into sadness, exactly, but into something softer, more fragile. He glanced over her head to Catherine, and in that single look, a whole exchange passed between them, the recognition of a moment they both knew was larger than it seemed. The shared ache of loss, the unspoken gratitude for what their daughter had just done. She was in the garden. Charlotte went on, her voice calm and certain. "I prayed that she's happy in heaven, and I told her we love her, and that I want to be brave like her." William bent slowly, lowering himself until he was eye level with his daughter. His hands came up to hold hers, the small fingers warm against his palm. "You did that?" he asked, his voice careful, as if not to disturb the weight of her words. Charlotte nodded, her expression open. "I even prayed for Granny Camilla. I told Granny Diana that I think it's okay to forgive people, even if they don't always understand us." Something in William's face shifted, then a tightening at the corners of his eyes. A shine that he tried, briefly, to blink away. But the effort was futile. The words had found their mark, pressing directly against an old place in his heart, where grief and love lived side by side. "That's a very kind thing to say," he murmured. "She would have loved hearing that. She would have loved you." Charlotte leaned forward then, looping her arms around his neck in a hug that was as much comfort as it was gift. "I wish I could have met her," she whispered against his shoulder. William closed his eyes, inhaling the faint, familiar scent of his little girl, letting it anchor him in the present, even as memory pulled him back. In that instant, he was no longer the Prince of Wales, no longer a public figure whose every gesture was scrutinized. He was simply a son holding his child, trying to form words for something too vast for language. Behind his closed eyes, he could see his mother's face, as clearly as if she were standing there, her laugh that lit up a room, the way her arms could shield and shelter, her fierce, unyielding love. And in his mind's eye, he saw her looking at Charlotte, smiling, proud, as though she had been there all along. Catherine stepped closer and laid a hand on his shoulder, her touch both grounding and knowing. William looked up at her, and in her gaze, he saw everything, the depth of her understanding, the quiet pride, the same thread of grief that had never really left him. She went on her own, Catherine said softly. No one told her to. She just knew. He turned his attention back to Charlotte, his voice thick but steady. You didn't just pray today, he told her. You reminded us of her, of who we're supposed to be. And in the stillness of that room, the legacy of Diana moved again, not in the form of grand speeches or public memorials, but in the whispered prayer of a little girl and the tears of a son who had never stopped missing his mother. That evening, the palace had settled into its quiet routines, the lingering scent of dinner still warm in the corridors, the soft murmur of staff moving discreetly in the distance, the steady rhythm of a household winding down. Toys had been tidied away. Louis tucked in with his usual giggles and last-minute requests for one more story. In Charlotte's room, the lamp on her nightstand cast a golden pool of light across the coverlet. But it was the moonlight streaming through the window that seemed to claim the space, spilling pale silver across her bed, and catching on the small bracelet resting beside her pillow, the delicate gold one William had given her. Once worn by Diana herself, Catherine paused at the doorway, her hand lightly on the frame. Unwilling to disturb the scene, Charlotte sat by the window, knees drawn up, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the gardens, as though she could still see the bronze figure standing among the flowers. She wasn't restless, nor lost in play. She was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if she were carrying on the conversation she had begun earlier that day. William came to stand beside Catherine, his presence filling the space without a sound, his eyes fixed on his daughter's silhouette. There was something reverent in the way he looked at her, as if he were witnessing the continuation of something precious, something that had managed to survive the years and the loss, and was now alive again, in the form of this small, steadfast child. In their home, Diana's name was never a headline, never the untouchable legend that the outside world clung to. Here, she was simply family. She was the woman who laughed loudly, who cried without shame, who gave more of herself than she often had to spare. They did not need marble memorials to remember her. Her presence lived in the way they spoke of kindness, in the courage they tried to teach their children, in the little moments when love was offered without condition, and now, without planning or prompting, her legacy had found a new heartbeat. That morning in the garden had shifted something not just for Charlotte, but for all of them. The quiet courage she had shown, the unprompted forgiveness she had extended, had reminded Catherine and William that legacy is not shaped in the glare of public duty or in the grand gestures that make headlines. It is built quietly, in the way one listens when it would be easier to turn away, in the choice to show compassion, even when it is not returned, in the decision to be brave when no one is watching. Charlotte didn't speak of the prayer again that night, but when Catherine stepped into the room to kiss her goodnight, the girl turned her face up and whispered, "I think Granny Diana knows I'm trying." The words were so soft, they almost vanished into the air. But Catherine caught them, smiling as she brushed a stray lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. "She does, my love," she answered, her voice a warm murmur. "And I think she's smiling right now." William lingered in the doorway after the lights were turned low, his hand resting on the wood as he looked back one last time. Charlotte was already asleep, her breathing slow and even, the bracelet glinting faintly in the moonlight. Something in him eased then, just enough for him to breathe out a quiet, almost soundless, "Thank you, Mom." The next morning, nothing outward had changed. There were no photographs to circulate, no official statements to prepare, no nods from the press. And yet something had been passed on, not a crown of gold heavy with jewels, but a crown of grace, invisible yet enduring. Charlotte would grow into it not because she was told she must, but because she already was. Diana's legacy had not ended in the tunnel in Paris. It had not been sealed away in the marble of memorials or the ink of headlines. It lived in the blue petals of forget-me-nots blooming in the garden she had once loved. In the voice of a little girl, kneeling before her likeness. In the quiet forgiveness, offered without being asked. And in the way love, once given freely, always finds its way home. Through Charlotte, that light quiet, steadfast, eternal would go on speaking, not with rebellion, but with reverence, not with noise, but with prayer, and in a world where crowns are too often measured by their weight, hers would be measured by its gentleness.